Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, we've got about 10 minutes before we start, so we'll let folks sign on and then we'll get started right at noon. Okay. Thanks everyone for coming today. Welcome to the 2018 Farm Bill Overview webinar, Farm Bill 101. It's presented by the Ecology Center Health Leaders Fellowship Program. We are recording this and we will post it to YouTube, and we'll share the slides, handouts, and links with all the registrants afterwards. So don't worry, we're going to kind of blaze through this pretty quickly because there's a lot of information, and I want to make sure we have some time for questions at the end. So don't worry, if you miss something, you'll be able to see the slides and follow up with us later. Okay. So we do have our Health Leaders Fellows on this webinar with us. So for you all, we're going to go over the learning objectives, which also happen to be the agenda for today. I forgot to mention, if you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and chat those into the chat box and we'll kind of review them later. I have Mara on the line who will help moderate that. So for our Health Leaders Fellows and for all of you, we're hoping today that you're going to better understand what the Farm Bill is and what it does for Michigan, what the Farm Bill policy process looks like and kind of where we're at in that process, and the basics of advocacy and campaign planning. And I'm getting a note, I just want to make sure. Oh, thanks. Okay. All right. So let's get started. I have to click back. All right, technology, wrong way. Here we go. I'm Lindsey Scalera. I'm the Sustainable Food Program Director at the Ecology Center. Hello. We will also be joined shortly by a special guest, Kendra Klein, who is the staff scientist at Friends of the Earth US. She'll be helping us better understand some things that are going on with the organic program. So we're excited to have her join today too. So let's just dive right in. All right, what is the Farm Bill? About every 5 years, Congress reauthorizes a massive piece of legislation, and it sets the nation's food and agriculture policy. The bill connects the food that's on our plates with the farmers and ranchers who grow it and the natural resources that make agriculture possible. So we're kind of all involved in this. Everybody eats, everybody uses agricultural products. The Farm Bill kind of sets the policy and the tone for how that's going to go. It began in 1933 as part of the New Deal legislation. It was a response to the sort of double crisis of the economic and environmental crisis of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. And the original goals were to keep food prices fair for farmers and consumers, ensure adequate food supply, and protect and sustain U.S. natural resources. And so those three goals remain to this day. The last and it's definitely expanded, the last Farm Bill was passed in 2014. And if you think about the whole bill as a book, and a book has chapters, the Farm Bill has titles. So each of those titles are kind of cover a bunch of different things, and they range from trade and energy policy to food security, crop insurance, a lot of things fall under this bill. So we've definitely expanded from those three goals, but those three goals do still remain. So what does the bill do? When everything's working well, the bill provides training and technical assistance to farmers and ranchers. It helps us preserve the future of farming and provides a farm safety net. It's supporting innovative research and education. We're harnessing the economic power of local food, helping farmers and ranchers invest on their farms to protect our air, water, and soil. It offers a number of grant and loan programs that go for a lot of different things. And it improves equity, justice, and fair markets. So does it do all these things perfectly? No. But because of advocacy and action from grassroots groups, we've been able to kind of push the Farm Bill in this direction and have some measure of all of these things in the bill, which is great. And that's also why being involved is so important. So I just want to cover a little bit about what Farm Bill programs we love in Michigan. So these are programs that Michigan farmers and food allies and eaters alike benefit from. So we're going to start this off with a problematic phrasing. So beginning and socially disadvantaged farmer programs. That term, socially disadvantaged farmers, is a USDA term. I'm just going to call it out as problematic. We might refer to folks as maybe historically underserved or historically excluded. We'll get into that program a little bit more later, but we in Michigan have definitely benefited from some of the programs for beginning farmers and ranchers, and a program called Section 2501 for short, which is outreach and technical assistance to socially disadvantaged farmers. Again, we'll get into what that means later. But the farmers market and local food promotion programs, we've benefited greatly from that. They've helped us expand a lot of farmers markets and promote local food all over the state. In the last Farm Bill, we got an expansion of being able to accept EBT at direct-to-consumer outlets. So that includes farmers markets and farm stands. In the last bill, we had some farm-to-school pilots. Michigan was one of 8 states that was included in that. And there were some really important nutrition incentive programs that were included in the last bill. The bill also provides programs for the grant programs for value-added and specialty crops. Specialty crops, we'll take a minute. That's what we refer to in the Farm Bill as food, mostly food that we eat. Think like what you see when you go to a farmer's market. Value added is where you take a crop and transform it in some way to add value to it. So berries to jam, that kind of thing. So there are some grants that help farmers and food producers kind of branch out that way. There are also conservation biodiversity programs and the National Organic Program, which we'll talk more about. We have lots of organic farmers here in Michigan, and we've definitely benefited from a lot of different conservation programs. And the biodiversity comes in with seed research, public seed research that farmers and other researchers conduct. We'll talk more about that later too. We also, in the last Farm Bill, got a whole farm revenue insurance program. And so that sounds kind of wonky, but basically that's helping diversified growers who grow up to 60 crops have access to an insurance program that's part of the safety net that we talked about. So there's some great programs that we've benefited from here in Michigan. But let's break it down. What is all this Farm Bill spending about? Kind of how does it break down? So the bill in 2014 was projected to spend close to $500 billion, so about $500 billion over the course of the 5 years that it would be in place. We'll kind of come back to what's in that other category because there's quite a lot of things in there, but the biggest pieces of the bill, of the spending in the bill, go to commodities. And just for clarity, commodity crops are agricultural crops that are traded, and usually they're storable and transportable, so things like cotton and peanuts, things like that. So we do eat some of those commodity crops, but they're all, part of that specific sort of set of crops. So crop insurance is another piece of that. That's that farmer safety net. The conservation programs are about 8%. And then the largest part of the bill, spending in the bill, is the nutrition title. So the nutrition title is where we have the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. There is funding in there for education and some different community-driven community food project work to address food insecurity and healthy food access. There is also some really important money in there for emergency food. So that's an important one to know about. And when you start to hear people talking about those two, the farm side and the food side maybe being split, historically, they have all been together, and there's really good reasons for that, because sort of you can't have one without the other. So let's get into that number, that 1%. There's a whole bunch of other titles that kind of fit into that other category there, that 1% of spending. Trade, credit, forestry, energy. There's a lot going on in all of those. There's rural development projects. So that does include some economic development and expansions of broadband to rural communities in Michigan, or not just in Michigan, everywhere. There's research, education, extension. There's that specialty crop term again, which is food that we eat. The horticultural title has organic, and under the miscellaneous title is where that socially disadvantaged, Section 2501 we call it, lives. So that other category amounts to total about $5 billion over 5 years of spending. So when you start to parse out all the different little programs, it really isn't that much that we have to work with, but the impact of these programs that we'll talk about and that we benefit from are really significant impact. I wanted to quickly just touch on this concept here and why sort of timing is important. There's a whole host of programs that are what we call programs without baseline funding. And what that means is that if we don't get a bill passed this year and they don't take steps to change this, there would be a whole bunch of bills, about 39, that could be stranded. There have been some examples of those bills include the Conservation Reserve program, the Conservation TIP program, which helps farmers who are already in the conservation program transfer their farms, generationally to another farmer. Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program, that's a really big one. We've had that in Michigan pretty much since it was created. A few other programs that would lose funding if we don't pass a bill this year. So they would just be stranded, left in the wind. The Food Insecurity and Nutrition Incentive Program is one of those, FENI for short. That's, if you guys are familiar with our Double Up Food Books program here in Michigan, that grant program has funded a large part of that program, and a few others. So it's really important to understand that there are programs that could lose funding if we don't pass the bill this year. So timing is important. Let's talk about the policy process. So we're not going to get into all of the hairy details here. You can read this a little closer when we send the slides, but I'm just going to give you a quick overview and talk about where we're at right now. So each chamber of Congress, the House and the Senate, they have an agriculture committee. It's those committees' jobs to draft the bill. They each work on their own version of the Farm Bill, and then they put that out to their respective chambers for amendments and a vote. That's what, hopefully, if you heard, that's what the House failed to pass last week, was the House Agriculture Committee's version of the Farm Bill in 2018. Anyway, continuing on, when both chambers have a version of their bill and it gets voted on, it goes to a conference committee. And that's where a group of representatives and senators create a unified bill. That unified bill goes back to both chambers and they vote on it in its final format, and then it goes to the president to sign it into law. So it's kind of a lot, but where are we right now? We're kind of in the middle of the committee work and bringing it to the full floor. That's because the House passed their version out of committee and they tried to get it passed last week. We just got word this morning that they will be trying to bring that back to the floor again. I believe on June 22nd is the date that I got. So that bill was pretty problematic, and so we're going to need all hands on deck. The Senate Agriculture Committee is currently working on their version of the bill, and we're expected to see it out next Monday. Monday the 28th. So it's important to keep an eye out for that because we don't know exactly what will be in it. So we need all hands on deck, to be ready to respond to these things. Okay, just so let me introduce you to so you know them, our agriculture committees. Senator Pat Roberts is the chairman of the Senate Ag Committee, and our Senator Debbie Stabenow here in Michigan is the ranking member. When the Democrats had the Senate, she was the chairwoman. And then in the House, it's Conway from Texas and Peterson from Minnesota. So that's who chairs those committees, and they're important because they kind of lead that work. One other quick thing about the policy process I want to make sure you know about, because you might be seeing some of these come through your inboxes or on different web pages that you might be looking at. Mark your bills. This is a strategy to kind of help us clarify what we want to see in the larger bill and basically someone in Congress introduces one of these bills, and usually we try to get it to be introduced in both chambers. And it helps, it's not meant to pass as a standalone bill, but rather to kind of be included in the larger bill. So I'll give you a tip. If you go to the sustainableagriculture.net and look at their Take Action page, that's the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. They have a number of marker bills that you can look at, and you can kind of see how they help us kind of define what we want to see in certain parts of the larger bill. So that's an important one to know. So once that bill gets passed, are we done? Right now, we're not really in this phase, but I think it's important to talk to folks about this and make sure you know that once the bill gets passed, that's a pretty intense process, but we're not done. We do need to make sure that we're keeping track of kind of the appropriations process, how these programs are implemented, and also when there are rules that need to be made that we, the public, weigh in on how those things go. So it's a little discouraging because it can be really exhausting, but once we figure out what happens with this bill, we'll have a breather and then we'll get back to work. So I want to talk to you today about what's at stake in the bill. So we're going to have, I'm going to go over a few things, and then I'll check to see if Kendra was able to join, and we'll turn it over to her. And if not, I will be able to cover some of the stuff that what we were hoping to have her talk about. And that's not her fault, it's my fault. So let's talk about some of the things that are at stake here. This is not comprehensive. This is just a short summary of things that are important in Michigan and in general. Oh, good, Kendra is on, great. So in a minute, I'll turn it over to her. Awesome. Okay, so programs that conserve the environment and protect biodiversity are at stake. So conservation programs, like I said earlier, they help us as the taxpayers invest in farmers protecting our air, water, and soil. It's hard for farmers to incorporate the cost of, for example, putting in a berm into the price of their corn or other agricultural products. But that berm can help prevent soil erosion. So that's kind of a way, there's a lot of programs that help us kind of invest in those conservation standards and making sure farmers all around the country are taking that action. Because this is one of the larger portions of spending in the bill, it's about 8%, it is often the first on the chopping block where they try to save money. And so often when we get into a farm bill process, they're trying to cut things that actually make a really big impact for soil health and water and air. So it's important to kind of keep those in mind. And then biodiversity for seed programs, it's important to know that we've had public seed breeding and research programs for a long time. This sounds kind of sci-fi, and it's not the kind of research like that we're talking about for GMOs generally, but it's the traditional practices of farmers developing and testing seeds that are well suited to a particular climate and growing style. So it's public research, and without those programs, family farmers might be forced to rely on sort of expensive private options that might not have sustainability and regional adaptability on their priority list. So that's one of the ones we should keep in mind. Here we go. So there's also a lot of programs that help people put food on the table and support local food. So like I said before, the SNAP program is a really important safety net for families and individuals that are in dire need of assistance. The nutrition title and a few of the other titles, we've made some major impacts to and had some gains in incentivizing healthy local foods. Like I mentioned, our Double Up Food Bucks program is supported by a grant from the Farm Bill. And generally we know that the nutrition title cuts to SNAP through various methods are likely. But we've been hearing from our partners in the emergency food sector, they're really cautioned that it's difficult to absorb all the folks who are food insecure if it's easier for them to get kicked off of the program, or if it's harder for people to qualify. So that's one that we need to kind of really stay on top of. Also programs that kind of are there to equal the playing field and promote equity for beginning in those historically underserved farmers. So I'll talk about beginning farmers first. We had a number of gains in the Farm Bill in 2014 that helped support beginning farmers and ranchers. We have to keep in mind that the average age of farmers in the US is hitting 60 years. So people are going to want to retire. We need that next generation of farmers to thrive. And it's definitely a difficult profession to get into. It's very expensive. And so there are programs in place to help beginning farmers establish and maintain farms. So gutting these programs could make it even more difficult to enter that profession and for farmers to see it as a viable option. And there's other, fallout from that would be, we could see increased consolidation of really big mega farms, which don't necessarily have all of our best interests at heart. And then when it comes to farmers of color, they've historically experienced just widespread discrimination and gaps in access to USDA programs, and both in the USDA programs and within the industry in general. And so I mentioned before that Section 2501 program, it's stronger than it has ever been, but this next Farm Bill could hurt it by kind of expanding the priorities and continuing to underfund it. And so that kind of undermines the strength and potential of this program to help, different populations fill in some of those gaps and help them access some of these important USDA programs that they're entitled to have access to. So there's also programs that support, family farmers in rural communities. And I think the one to really talk about is the safety net programs. So when you look at commodity subsidy programs and the crop insurance program, that makes up a really significant portion of Farm Bill spending. And within that, we had some really good gains in the 2014 Farm Bill that were intended to kind of help smaller and mid-sized farmers access some of these safety net programs. We have to make sure, what's at stake here is that we have to make sure that these crop insurance programs, become more efficient and fair to beginning and smaller farmers and organic farmers. So changes in those programs could kind of make it harder for either easier for other types of farms to sort of eat up that funding and kind of not leaving much for the rest. So, and then another thing that's at stake is the integrity of the National Organic Program. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kendra. Let's see here.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, good. I'll mute myself and you can tell me when to advance the slide.
And before you mute yourself, remind me how many minutes?
If you have, we can have even up to, I think, let's say 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay. That sounds perfect. I'll pace myself. So many thanks to Lindsey and to the Ecology Center for letting me join you today. I am Kendra Klein. I am the Senior Staff Scientist at Friends of the Earth. And we are really excited to be working with the Ecology Center on this particular threat that is unfolding in the Farm Bill, and that is to the integrity of the organic standards. So we know that there is a large and growing body of data on the health harms of pesticides for farm workers, farmers, rural communities, and also for consumers. And we also know that there's data that show that eating an organic diet rapidly reduces exposure to pesticides within days. There's some great studies that did an organic diet intervention. So organic is great for reducing the overall environmental and public health burden of pesticide exposure. There's many other reasons why organic is a really important solution in our food system and somewhat of a blueprint for the food system that we need, that all people deserve access to organic food. So along with pesticides, it reduces use of synthetic fertilizer. It does not allow use of antibiotics in livestock production. In fact, there are lower rates of antibiotic-resistant bacteria on organic meat. So I could write a long list of reasons why we need to protect the organic standards. So what we see happening, both in the House version of the Farm Bill, there was some noxious language around the National Organic Standards Board, And also on the Senate side, what we're really tracking is that the Agriculture Committee Chairman, Pat Roberts, has made some very vocal critiques of the National Organic Standards Board. And this is an independent citizen body that was written into the original organic law to safeguard the standards and to get full community input from all stakeholders on the development of the standards and the continual improvement of the standards. And it was really sort of a gatekeeper between political interests and special interests and those robust organic standards that we have now maintained for some 20 years. So what the board does, along with making recommendations for improvement of the standards, is no materials can be added to the list of what organic farmers can use without the okay from the National Organic Standards Board. And what we saw in the House language, and I don't know, Lindsey, if you've got some more information on the next slide that might be useful. What we saw in the House bill and what we're expecting from the Senate is a weakening of the authority of the National Organic Standards Board. And this really is a way to open up those standards to the addition of toxic pesticides and potentially to GMOs. And once we do that, consumer confidence in the organic label will be severely undermined, and really that is the growth engine. So organic farmers rely entirely on consumer confidence in that label. And really it's shifting the orientation from family farmers towards corporate interests. So talking to many people in the organic community and just trying to figure out this moment in time for organic is really potentially a make or break. It's an interesting moment because we're likely to see gains for the organic program in the Farm Bill at the same time that there is this attack on the integrity of the standards. So we have really been mobilizing people to stand up and let their senators know that we need a strong standard. While we work to make organic accessible to all, we need to maintain the robustness of those standards. And so the Ecology Center and those of you in Michigan are in a really important place in this fight, I would say, I guess, because Senator Stabenow is the ranking member on the Agriculture Committee. And so she is who we're looking to really stand strong. She's been a champion of organic in the past, and she needs to hear loud and clear that the National Organic Standards Board is a critical part of the organic program. And this is something that even the organic industry is standing up for. So the Organic Trade Association sent Stabenow and Roberts a sign-on letter with those companies that we recognize, like Cliff Bar and Annie's and Kashi, and also some really big players like Nestle and Smuckers. So from small to large, companies understand that consumer trust in the seal is really tantamount. So that it's a quick snapshot of what we're expecting to happen and what's at stake and why it's so important.
Thank you so much, Kendra. And Kendra will stay on the line and we'll be able to answer some questions a little bit later. But I do have this link here to our e-action just for Michigan. And for folks that we are working to build out one that's more national this week. So you'll get that link later. So there's a couple of other things I want to talk about. One other thing to keep in mind, I really believe this. These issues, excuse me, in the Farm Bill are regional and not partisan. So everybody eats. We rely on farms to feed us in this country, and I think it tends to shy people away getting involved in policy. I think that's the partisanship piece of it. But these issues really are regional and not partisan. So I think it's important that folks from everywhere speak up. So let's get into what speaking up might look like and getting involved. So I wanted to, as part of this webinar, give you all a really quick overview of Farm Bill advocacy and kind of how to mobilize within your community and give you some approaches that might be helpful to you. So we kind of say that everybody's engagement and voice and passion is really needed as we move through this process. And, Kendra pointed out that sometimes it feels like it's a fight, sometimes less so, but in certain aspects of it, I think it's important to kind of bring that passion to this work because it makes a big difference. So let's just quickly talk about what is advocacy. When you and your community mobilize to communicate with or influence decision makers on matters that are important to the community's quality of life, that's advocacy. So it's really broad. I think people hear that and they immediately jump to the idea of lobbying, which is a part of advocacy, but it's just one small part. So it's much broader than that. And I think we'll put in the handout a link for you to learn more about the difference between lobbying and the whole larger field of advocacy. So that's from boulderadvocacy.org, I think, but that'll be in the handout. So we just want to point that out. Every citizen, has the right to lobby their legislators, and even nonprofits do have the right to do that with some restrictions. So the e-action we shared is a good example of asking a legislator to take a specific stance. But all of the education and organizing that kind of go around this to raise awareness about these issues, that's all advocacy. And so let's talk about campaigns. So when you've decided that you want to be an advocate, generally we talk about action around that in the terms of campaign. So I have a few models and tips for you. Let's define it first. So broadly, it's a time-limited process with specific steps that are designed to help us advocate for and accomplish our goals. Now, we don't always win our campaigns, so to speak. So there's two goals to engaging in a campaign. That's one, to create change that we want to see, and two, to build power and influence. So as you go through and you take the steps to engage in a campaign and engage in advocacy, you are building power and influence within your community. Just the people power, the sheer people power, but also getting to know each other and getting on the same page has a lot of impact. So I have a couple of models I want to share. The first one is group development. Those of you who have heard me present before are probably sick of me talking about this. I'm obsessed with it. So, but I think it's really helpful as an approach. So here's a little diagram for my friends from MIFMA. You saw this already. The idea is that we kind of bring everyone along a process, and we can use this framework to kind of plan our approach. So let's get into it. The thing to start with is the why, the purpose. So identifying the goal of the campaign and what's the outcome or outcomes that we're looking for, and getting everyone on the same page about that. And then second step is starting to look at who are we trying to influence? Who do we need to bring or engage as messengers in this process? Those are, in campaign planning, usually called the targets. Then we can get into the how. So what strategies are going to help us carry out that message or carry that message to our targets? What assets do we already have that we can use? So if we have a listserv or a Facebook page or a meeting that we go to, what assets do we already have that we can kind of use to engage people? And also considering what's going to work for our community, because not every kind of strategy will work. And then you can get into the what, which is specific activities that our strategies lead us to. And I'm going to give you some examples, but I want to go back up to the diagram. Please also notice that there's feedback happening throughout that process. So we're always, checking in with our community and everyone that we want to engage and getting feedback. So that kind of leads us into this next one, which is the grassroots engagement model, which is something I developed along with my two colleagues during the last Farm Bill process. So we kind of honed in on this is how we tend to engage people in grassroots advocacy. So there's the diagram. The arrows are going every which way because they're all connected. They're all overlapping. But for me, this was helpful to kind of plan my approach when I was doing campaign organizing. So the strategies here are around network building strategies that help you build relationships. And you're thinking about the allies you should have, the key constituents that you want to engage, and the decision makers. Building relationships with all three of those folks. Education and training, so understanding, what is important to the community and to our allies, and then sharing knowledge and raising awareness. There's all different kinds of strategies and activities that kind of lead from that or flow from that. There's direct action strategies that have to do with communicating with and holding decision makers accountable by demonstrating our people power. Our e-action is an example of that strategy. And then media and storytelling. So sharing the stories of individuals and communities affected by the issue. So we did a lot of this during my time. We did a lot of story banking with farmers. When I worked for the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, we do a lot of this storytelling at Ecology Center. It helps illustrate the sort of impact and importance of these policies and how they play out in the daily lives of individuals and communities. So those are all really important strategies, and you can kind of think of different ways to activities that kind of flow from each of those strategies. So here's a few examples. For network building, like let's say you host a letter writing event, and this one actually is funny because it kind of is all of them at once. So you can host a letter writing event. You'll have people mingling and mixing. Maybe they're also getting educated about the issue while they're doing that. That's engaging in a direct action. And maybe that letter, you're encouraging them to do some of their own storytelling in that letter so that their legislator knows how it impacts their constituents. So that one's kind of a fun one because it kind of encompasses all of the strategies. But a few others, education, you could present to a local group of potential advocates. For direct action, you could set up an in-district meeting with your legislator or their staff. Another one is inviting them out to your events. Media and storytelling, I threw this one in, making videos of constituents who are affected by that. The Washita Food Policy Council just did some great videos with farmers to kind of cover some of the things that they feel are important in the next farm bill. Okay, so that was it for that. And what do we do next? So the four things I like to leave people with are: you can learn more, you can take action, you can spread the word, and you can share your story. All four of those things, if you do any one of them, you're helping out. All four even better. If you need some examples of what some of that looks like, I will share the handout that I'm going to share with you guys via email. We'll have a lot of good examples of websites and things you can go to learn more, and you can look at take action pages and things like that. I'm going to put in a plug again for our e-action, and we'll send that link to you because it would be great if you could take a look at that and see if you feel comfortable signing on to it. So let's turn ourselves over to questions here. So we've got a couple of chats. Maybe Mara, can I ask you to help moderate the questions? We had a hand up. Christine asked, yes, we will be sending a link to this recording a little bit later this week, and along with some handouts to help you continue to plan your actions. Okay, we had another hand up. Were there any questions in the chat box?
No, there are not any right now.
Not any right now. Okay, so let's open it up. Who has questions? I know we went through that really quickly. Okay, we have a question here. Let's see. Yeah, any websites you can be directed to learn more. So, my main one that I go to a lot, and I'm a little bit biased because I used to work for them, is the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. So on that website, I mentioned it, you can see some of the marker bills that are there. They actually have a grassroots guide to the Farm Bill. So if you're curious about any of those specific bills and how you, maybe how they impact you, or how to even access some of those, because while we're waiting for this next bill to be passed, there are still some grant and loan programs that are active. You can definitely go check that out. And the handout that I have has a whole host of other websites for food access and food insecurity. We generally send people to the website FRAC, Food Research Action Council, and there's a few other ones on there. Okay, so we have some more questions. What happens to the unspent federal dollars that are appropriated in this bill? That is a good question. I'm not sure if I know how to answer that, actually. So I might need to follow up with you on that. I don't have a lot of experience with unspent federal dollars. Usually we had so many people, we have to spend every single bit of it. So we might have to come back to you on that, Christine. Thank you. So maybe this one is for Kendra. I'm gonna see if I can, here we go. If the NOSB, the National Organic Standards Board, will have less input in NOP rules under this farm bill, who will decide the NOP rules? My understanding was that the NOSB, it's the NOSB who created that, or was created in order to help decide the rules for the NOP, National Organic Program, in the first place. So Kendra, do you have a sense of what would happen to the rulemaking process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the NOSB, National Organic Standards Board, it has a really extensive, transparent and democratic rulemaking process. But they don't make the rules, they recommend new rules to the USDA, and then it is up to the Secretary of Agriculture to accept those rules or not. So what we've seen recently is the Secretary of Agriculture is ignoring the recommendations of the NOSB. So, for example, there was an animal welfare rule that was 10 years in the making, thousands of people weighing in, hours of public comment, and public comments submitted, and the Secretary recently killed that altogether, and it's not going to go into action. So we're seeing sort of a disregard for the important role of the NOSB. And just to say, of all the reasons to support the organic program, one is that it really is the most transparent and democratic governance system of any part of our food system. It's sort of a striking example of democracy in action. So the special role that the NOSB has had is that they have had the actual statutory responsibility over that list, and that is what's going to change. That what we saw in the House version was language that would circumvent the NOSB's authority to keep toxic pesticides off of the list. So things like granting emergency exemptions to the Secretary of Agriculture, pretty savvy ways that the language would have gotten around what we currently have, which is a strong NOSB that can keep toxics off of the list. And I wrote an article for Food Tank. If you Google my name and Food Tank, it should come up. That goes through what are the specific ways that the House language did that. Congressman Rodney Davis from Illinois swooped in with an amendment at the last moment to curtail the damage. And that just goes to show we have growing support from both Republicans and Democrats for the organic program. So we're expecting Senator Roberts to be much more aggressive in his attack and really need a strong public mobilization. And again, in particular, if you all could give Senator Stabenow a call and just stress the importance of her standing strong. That's really one of the key things right now as they're writing the language.
Thank you so much, Kendra. Yeah, that's one thing I didn't mention earlier was your calls matter. Calling your senators and representatives is the best way to get that message across. The e-actions are really helpful because it shows a broad support, but when you can make a call directly, it's very impactful. While we're on that subject, there's a couple more great questions. We'll get to some of those, but Kendra, would you be able to explain who makes up the National Organic Standard Board? Like what types of people?
Yeah, so there's 15 members. They're citizens. They serve for 5 years on the board, and there's a recipe of who's on there, and I forget the exact numbers, but 3 farmers, 3 consumers, somebody with a background in ecology or toxicology, companies that are invested in the organic industry, so a whole range of stakeholders. And they meet twice a year. The public is welcome. Hundreds of people show up to each meeting, and you can too. and submit public comments to them. So they're citizens who are volunteering their time.
Great, thank you. So we have, Rhonda, I want to let you know we are going to come back to your question, but we have a couple more about organic programs. So Christine asked, currently there's federal dollars available to help offset organic certification. Are those dollars in jeopardy? And the answer is yes. Yes.
Yes.
Take it away.
So I'm focusing on the NOSB, because that, if we lose the authority of the NOSB, we're sort of cracking open organic, and therefore other organic programs, are secondary really to preserving the integrity of the standards. But yes, the National Organic Certification Cost Share Program that helps small and mid-sized farmers get certified and stay certified was zeroed out in the House bill, and so we're concerned about that. Funding for organic agriculture research, which benefits all farmers. That's research that all farmers can use. We did see a small increase on the House side. We're not sure what we're going to see. This is the odd mixed bag of organic in the Farm Bill. On the House side, the Conservation Stewardship Program was gutted, and it's another really critical program for all farmers and especially for organic farmers. So we're tracking a whole range of programs and expect the Senate version, again, to be a mixed bag.
We'll come back to some of the other organic questions. I want to answer Rhonda's question, which is, what are the number of minority organic farms in Michigan, and are there groups to support them? So Rhonda, I'm not sure if I can answer the number of minority organic farms, and I'm guessing you mean like minority owned and operated, but we do have groups to support them. One important organization that I will point you to is the Michigan Food and Farming Systems, MIFS. That is their sort of charter and calling, is to sort of fill in the gaps and serve what we would call like historically underserved farmers. So they work with veteran groups, or farmer veterans, women in agriculture, and other like racial and ethnic minority groups. And so there's, and I will say groups to support them, that's sort of their charter and their space, but a lot of the organizations in Michigan take equity in the Farm Bill and in the food system very seriously. And there are a lot of pieces to that movement. Thanks, Rhonda. Yeah. A lot of pieces to that movement kind of being played out in other spaces as well. So we're currently right now, there's a host of people planning a racial equity in the food system conference for 2019. And that will probably be in Kalamazoo. There's not a lot of information just yet about like what's going to happen, but that's underway. And I'll put a plug in for the Michigan Good Food Summit this year. Our the Good Food Charter. That's a whole other story, but I'll include that in the handout. But we're having a huge Good Food Summit this October 22nd in Lansing, Michigan, and our theme for the conference is Amplifying Voices for Equity with regard to the food system. That's not the official title, but Amplifying Voices for Equity is. So I just wanted to point that out. I think it's a great question. There are other groups too, but I hesitate to speak for them. So I'll include some of that in the handout as well. So back to some of the questions here about the NOSB. Christine had two good questions. I think for you, Kendra. She wanted to know, are those, you mentioned that the National Organic Standards Board folks are volunteers. Are they paid or compensated, I guess? And she wanted to know too, like what were we mentioned that there were some critiques from Roberts. What were some of those critiques?
So my understanding is they are not paid, but that's a great question that I can look into. His critique is not so much the substance of the critiques as understanding that what he perceives is that the NOSB stands between the special interests that would like to water down the organic standards and the ability to do that. our intelligence from talking to senators, talking to folks in the organic industry, is that it's pesticide companies that have been lobbying for these changes, and it's also large conventional growers or conventional, very large. I'm not talking like family farmers, but growers who want to get in on the organic market, but are interested in doing so in the easiest way possible, and rather than farming with nature and working with the ecosystem, which is what makes organic work, they're interested in just input substitution, which is, rather than use the many pesticides and fertilizers allowed in conventional agriculture, to use those handful that are allowed in organic agriculture without actually changing the nature of the system. And so they have an interest in growing what's allowed in organic agriculture in order to make organic production easier. So it's a really interesting tension between organic being the fastest growing part of the market. Sales are blowing past the conventional food industry, and so companies see this as a real growth market, which is all very positive. But we're in a moment of how that hits up against the efficiencies and industrialization of the conventional food system. So we want organic to grow, but we want it to grow in a solid and robust way.
Great, thank you. And Christine asked if there'll be a workshop on the Farm Bill at Plan for the Good Food Summit. So I'm on the planning committee. We did not plan for that. However, we were considering having an open space section of the conference, and so I will make the suggestion that we do a Farm Bill session then, and I can help coordinate that. Thanks, Christine. Any other questions? Oh, we have a chat here. Oh, Jessica has a question. Sorry, I didn't see it. Mara, can you copy that somewhere? Oh, here, Jessica, sorry. Oh, no, we answered that question. Oh, yeah, we covered it, yep. That was about who makes up the National Organic Standards Board. All right. Well, if there's no further questions, obviously you can get in touch with us when you, if you do. And let me go back to my PowerPoint here. Just be thinking about what your plans are for the 2018 Farm Bill process. I want to offer a really hearty thank you for Kendra joining us today. I really appreciate it. You taking your time and hopping on to this call and sharing your information with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining. And I want to thank everybody here for coming to our webinar. And we will be in touch, this week with the video link and the handouts and all the goodies. So if you do have questions, please reach out. I didn't put my email address in this, but I'll make sure you have it. It's Lindsey with an E at ecocenter.org. Feel free to get in touch. Let us know if you have plans or want to collaborate. Thank you. Thanks, Mara. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll call it quits and be on the lookout for a follow-up email from us. Thank you.